TrumpDeathToll.org. 956,621 dead Americans from COVID now. That doesn't begin to scratch the surface, though, of the number of people who have been disabled by COVID. We're just now starting to get into this and touched by COVID in so many other ways as well. On the line with us is Kristin Urquiza. Kristin, am I pronouncing your name correctly?
Yeah, you have it correct.
Okay, great. Thank you. The founder, or the co-founder and chief activist of markedbycovid.com. She's the daughter of Mark Anthony Urquiza, who died from COVID-19 in this past June, and his only underlying condition was believing Donald Trump. Kristin, and your Twitter handle is KDURQUIZA or at markedbycovid. Kristin, tell us your story and about markedbycovid.com. What provoked you to start this organization, and what are you all up to? What are you doing?
Thanks for having me on, Tom. Marked by COVID, I started 8 days after my dad passed from COVID-19. And the reason why I started it is because not only was I experiencing so much grief and sadness at his passing, but I was angry and upset that he got sick in the first place. He was a supporter, as you mentioned, of President Trump. And whenever the state of Arizona, where he lived, reopened, the president and the governor at that time, Doug Ducey, said it was fine. It was okay. He encouraged people to go out and, have dinner with friends. And we now know that that wasn't safe to do so. And as a result, my dad got sick and tragically passed away. So Marked by COVID is now working to not only connect families who have lost loved ones to provide support and spaces for grieving, but we're also working towards accountability. We're calling for a commission, a truth commission. We're calling for permanent memorials, like COVID Memorial Day, and also physical memorials, as well as ensuring that all lessons learned from this tragedy are codified and passed on to future generations.
I understand today is COVID Memorial Day. Do I have that right?
You have it right. The first Monday of March, so that's today, March 7th, is what we're calling for COVID Memorial Day. Over 150 cities across the country have issued proclamations and resolutions noting that. And we also have resolutions in both the Senate and the House. So this is gaining momentum and speed. It's not a question of if, but when.
I recall when there were hundreds of thousands of little white flags on the National Mall, each one after a person who had died of COVID. Is there any movement toward creating, kind of the equivalent of a war memorial? I mean, more people have died from COVID than died in Vietnam. And in fact, I think more Americans have died from COVID than have died in all of our wars.
Isn't that remarkable? Yeah. And so it destroys my heart thinking about that reality that we've lost nearly a million people already here in the U.S., a scale that is unimaginable. It's a million legacies that we are working to preserve. And yes, we are leading also to charge in a permanent memorial. And we're imagining not only a memorial in Washington, D.C., where, we can gather and be together, but also memorials in places all across the country, at the city level, at the state level. We want to make sure that this pandemic is not forgotten. No. We forgot the 1918 pandemic. We cannot let this pandemic go pushed into the memory hole.
Yeah, President Wilson literally never mentioned flu during 1918, 1919, 1920, even though he got it himself. You mentioned a moment ago that today is COVID Memorial Day, but this has not been memorialized by the House and Senate as an official federal holiday, whether it's a take time off from work holiday or just, one of those days that we note. Kind of Valentine's Day kind of holiday, obviously a very different paradigm, but, not a day that you typically get off work, but everybody knows about. Where is that effort at?
Right now, the resolutions are in the House and in the Senate in their respective committees. So we've gotten them introduced, and we're working to get a vote and consideration on the floor. But that's going to take more people continuing not only to, observe COVID Memorial Day, but us talking to our elected officials throughout the course of the year, which we've been mobilizing people to do, having folks sit down over a Zoom meeting or even in person in some instances with their lawmakers to share their stories and to share why this is so important. And this is important not just to folks who have lost a loved one or people living with long COVID, the incredibly huge amount of folks who are going to be disabled for quite some time. This is also important for all of us to have a space and time to reflect upon the last 2 years of what we've been through together, to have that collective memory, but that committing not to forget is going to ensure that we're better prepared for any future crises that come our way.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point. Do we have? And I realize you're not a physician or a medical expert, but do we have? But you are, kind of in the middle of this this storm in terms of information and publicity. Do we have any good sense yet how many millions of Americans are experiencing lingering symptoms of COVID or have been disabled by COVID, and what the principal disabilities are?
Yeah, I'm really glad that you asked that. And conservative estimates are that 10% of people who had COVID at one point or another will have long COVID. And the more generous estimates are upwards to 33%.
Wow.
And it's really important that we note that these are folks that sometimes only had acute, very acute COVID, did not have any symptoms, but later developed post-viral illness. And the whole kaleidoscope of symptoms that come with long COVID range from malaise and extreme fatigue to cognitive functions and abilities to perform the way that you did in a workplace, an ability to hold multiple pieces of information in your brain at the same time, to a whole host of other issues. And that's also not counting the people who were discharged from COVID, do not have long COVID, but have long-term health disability because they were on a ventilator for 60 days and their lungs are forever damaged. So we know that there are at least 10 million additional folks in these two categories, but upwards of probably more like 30 million people who are disabled as a result of getting COVID-19.
I looked over, we're talking with Kristin Urquiza, the co-founder and chief activist of markedbycovid.com. I looked over your website, and, it seems fairly nonpartisan. Your dad was killed by Donald Trump's lies, essentially. My words, not yours, but, I know people who are in that situation. Is there any effort to memorialize? I mean, we have 4% of the world's population, and we had something like 20% of the world's COVID deaths, and COVID in large part because of the way that the Trump administration chose to respond to this by minimizing it and playing it down, because Trump was afraid that if the economy went down, he would lose the election, which of course is exactly what happened. Is there any attempt to tell the truthful story of this? I mean, like the Holocaust memorials do, or are you trying to make an attempt to avoid the politics altogether?
Oh my goodness. This is all about stopping revisionist history. This is about telling the truth. And, to your point, we are absolutely a nonpartisan group, but that doesn't mean that we shy away from speaking our truth. And so in my instance, I believe that the president of the United States, Donald Trump, the former president, was directly responsible not only for my dad's death, but millions of additional individuals. And, to thinking about, how do we capture that? I look more at the lynching museum in Alabama, the Holocaust museums, as examples of ways in which we can really remember, and not only the good parts of our history, but also the more challenging parts of our history. And that's exactly what this episode has been for folks, whether or not you've lost a loved one. There's been nothing really great, unless you're a billionaire, about the last few years.
Yeah.
And we've got to remember that. We cannot sugarcoat it. This cannot be like a Christopher Columbus sailed the ocean blue moment. This has to be the real truth, codified.